Hello and welcome to this, our first lecture in Module 2 of our course on drought. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking this course. Before I get to the lecture, let me remind you that we would be happy if you share this course within your network so that more people take this course, because drought is everybody's business. Now today, I want to look with you at the impacts of drought. You would have heard me mention this in previous lectures, but today I want to be a little bit more concrete, a little bit more detailed as regards the impacts of drought on us, right? As established earlier, the first thing that really happens, the first result that comes from a drought is that there is a scarcity of water, okay? There's less water available. Now, we must remember that life on land is basically impossible without water. Yes, that is true. A matter of fact, as a human being, on the average, we would live 6 days without drinking any water. After that, we'll die. So water is absolutely central if we are to live on land, as we do now. Now, what happens then when there is a drought? Well, there's less water available. But not only less water available, there is less access to water. In other words, the water might have been here near to you. You can easily get it. Now you have to travel miles to get it. Or you might have paid $10 a gallon for water. Now you have to pay $20 a gallon for water. So because there is less water available, of course, then competition for water increases. And what can that lead to? Competition could ultimately lead to conflict. And so what we see here is that the sheer shrinking of the quantity of water, okay, leads to all of these problems. But it's not just the quantity of the water that we're talking about. It's also the quality. Usually when you have less water like that, okay, impurities in the water are more prevalent. And so this is a problem not just of quantity, but of quality. Now, what happens in a situation like that is that it forces the people who are suffering from a lack or a shortage of water to find other sources. And that creates a challenge. But let's look more directly at what are some of the consequences when there is a shortage of water. Firstly, we must start where? In the home. And in the home, there's less water for drinking, there's less water for sanitation, and the maintenance of cleanliness. And what does that lead to? Well, it leads to a compromise of your hygiene, because you don't have water to maintain the standard of hygiene. And that leads to what? That could lead to the breeding of disease and the spreading of disease. And so the situation becomes very, very complex. And then we must remember, this is even more so for the poor and the vulnerable. Those of us who are a little bit more well off might be able to deal with this up to a point, but the poor and the vulnerable, they suffer most. And ultimately, you know, the important thing here to understand is this, that if this continues, if drought continues this way, and we can't have any water to drink, we will ultimately die of thirst. And that's the truth. So that is water, or the shortage thereof, how it can impact us in a nutshell. But that's just the beginning of the story, to be honest with you. If we turn now, let us turn to food. If we turn to food, you would see how water is so essential for this very, very vital thing we call food. In the first place, all of our food comes from what? Plants and animals, generally speaking, right? No plant and no animal can live on land without water. That is impossible. And once there is no water, what happens? The soil itself becomes so dry that it literally dies. As you know, we have discussed in the previous lecture the issue of the Dust Bowl in North America and the issue of the Sahel. The soil literally dies. And once the soil dies, what happens? The plants die. And once the plants die, what do the animals eat? Nothing. Vegetation is dead. And so the plants die. That means what? Our food supply is completely compromised, if not totally lost. okay? And with a situation like that, then you have spiraling effects, increase, right, effects, continuously increasing effects, okay, and dramatic effects. So with a fall in the production of food, prices rise. That's the first thing that happens. And even when we can continue to do a bit of farming, that would have to be done using irrigation. Again, agriculture becomes more expensive, so prices rise. And there is more competition for this food. And you will recall, not in the long past, there have been riots in many cities around the world. Why? Because of the rise in prices of food. You know, without food, you cannot live. And so we have to understand that when you talk about drought affecting us, it's not just the water, but the cascading effects as well. Let us look, for example, at rivers. We know that in quite a few countries, the fish is freshwater fish. They get it from lakes or from rivers, you know, and things like crayfish and so on, right? When these things dry up, of course, the river fish dies, okay? And so therefore, again, you have a problem with your food supply. We must understand that a lot of people think, okay, these are just little corners of the world that this thing might affect. Ultimately, it affects all of us. And if the production of X or Y in X or Y places falls, and in X or Y places it falls drastically, the global price for that product goes up. And when the global price for that product goes up, we all have to pay more. You see, the truth is that drought affects food in such a way that it leads to hunger, it leads to more poverty, it leads to malnutrition, and ultimately, of course, it threatens the very existence of all biodiversity. Not just man, not just us, but our food, which is our plants and our animals, and even the fish in the river. So you have to understand the drought truly and really have a tremendous effect on our food security. Don't fool yourself and think that you could separate our food security from drought. That would be a mistake. That would be a mistake. I want to thank you very much for listening to this lecture. I want to remind you that this is just a brief lecture. If you want to know more, you would have to read the recommended material and additional material as well. But please remember that you can always call this number or write to us at this email should you have any problems taking this course. Finally, we are again grateful that you share this video with people within your network. Until next time, I am Richard Byron Cox.
Gummy.